Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Bufnagle the podcast, where we explore entertaining and enlightening discussions of the adventure of life and all things good, from science and technology to history and philosophy to leadership and success. We hope to give you a better understanding of the world and skills for everyone to pursue their own adventure.
Well, hi, everybody, and welcome back to Bufnagle the podcast, where we talk about all things good in the pursuit of the adventure of life. I am Rafe, and today's, it's a Tuesday, and that means it's a podcast Tuesday, and that means it's a Bufnagle podcast Tuesday, and that means it's a great day. And it's a great day because we have great listeners. You listeners have made us a global top 10% podcast. Remember, you can reach us at bufnagle@bufnagle.com. Remember to share the love. Share the buff, tell a friend to listen, and you will get a free episode. Hit the 5-star review thing, hit subscribe, hit like, smiley stars, whatever it is on your end that makes my life better will make your life better. And somewhere buried in the show notes, if you dig in there carefully, you will find a link to buy me a coffee. That is always appreciated. Thank you very much. Today's episode is an old story that I got reminded of some time ago, and I don't remember what caused me to do that, but I wanted to. It reminds me of some things that I will point out at the end once the story is told. But it's things that are relevant in this current day and age. So back around 2007, summer of 2007, the Tennessee Lottery. I was living in Tennessee at the time. The Tennessee Lottery had a lottery game that was a mechanical lottery thing. So there are balls in an urn, and something scatters the balls and spins them around and randomizes them, and then a number of balls are chosen from the bin in one fashion or another. And they switched from a mechanical system to a computer system in late July, and by late August, the Tennessee Lottery had announced that there was a glitch found in the computer code, and the glitch was this, and it's a rather important glitch to have. Glitches aren't important; glitches are bad, but it's important to know what the impact of that glitch is. The glitch had the impact to instead of the game was supposed to choose essentially a 3-digit number. There's a number 0 through 9 for the first digit, 0 through 9 for the second digit, and 0 through 9 for the third digit. And so the pick 3 game was to choose a single, pick a single digit number for each little space. So you could get the number 271 or the number 839 or the number 141, something like that. And there was a game called Pick 4, which actually had 4 digits instead of just 3. And there was a glitch in the code. Okay, so in Pick 3, there are, if you do the math there's 10 digits for the first, 10 possible things for the first digit. There's 10 possible things for the second digit and 10 possible things for the third digit. So there's 1,000 different possible things you could choose. And in Pick 4, there's actually 10,000 of them. So the probability of winning in Pick 3 was 1 in 1,000, and the probability of winning in Pick 4 was 1 in 10,000, and it turns out that you would win. I believe it was $500 if you got the Pick 3 right, and it was $5,000 if you got the Pick 4 right. So it turned out the glitch, and you can read it. You can call it a glitch, and they called it a glitch, but it was really, well, quite frankly, it was an error. Okay, so it was a programming error, and at issue was that the programming precluded duplicate values. Okay, so what that means is in the Pick 3 game, the number 140 was possible because 1 and 4 and 0 are not the same number. But the number 141 was not possible since there's 2 ones in that number. It's 141. Similarly, in Pick 4, the number 5271 was possible, but 5272 was not, nor was 7271, nor 7771, right? Those are not possible because there are duplicates within that number. So the question is, how did this happen? Why did the computer do the wrong thing? Well, computers, as we know, they will do exactly what you tell them to do. They are very literal. They're very fast. But they aren't very smart, even if they have artificial intelligence. The computer was told to pick three numbers, or four in the term in the parlance of the pick four game, and it was going to pick three elements from the set 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and it was put them into those little slots. So in theory, like I said, anything from 0, 0, 0 up to 9, 9, 9 in the pick three game was possible, and everything in between there. So there were 1,000 possibilities, and in pick four, you could do the same thing, but with four numbers. So there's 10,000 possibilities. So if I ask you to do that, okay, I have a bin with numbers 0 through 9 in there, and I say, I want you to pick three of them out here and put them in these little slots. The first thing you should ask is you say, okay, so I reach in there, I pull one of the balls out, and I put that in the first slot. When I pick the second number out, should I put that first ball back in before I do that? And the answer is, of course, if the way I laid out the problem is, yes, you should put that ball back in so that it could be in the second spot. Otherwise, if you pull out like a 3 on the first hole, if the 3 is not back in the bin to be picked, then it can't show up on the second time. Okay, so this process of pulling numbers out of the bin, when you put it back in, the idea of putting it back in is called replacement. Okay, and it's a pretty obvious name, right? And there's two options in statistics and probability for drawing out a number. One of them is with replacement, which you put the number back in, and one is without replacement, which is you leave that number out once you draw it. So computers, of course, can do either of these things, but the computer needs to know which one you want it to do. And, that's, you can do it either way, and you will get different possible outcomes depending on which one you do. So typically there's a function in the computer programming language that you're using that does probably both of them, or there might be one function that does one and one function that does the other. And you will tell it to do it with or without replacement, or you'll have to pick a different function for one way or a different function for the other way, one with or one without. But regardless of this, you need to know which one is which and what the difference is, and you need to know which one you want. So there's this error in the code, and the code was rolled out into production in late July of 2007. And by late August, they revealed that there was this glitch, and that none of the duplicates were, none of them had been possible during that time. And they had fixed the error, and God's in his heaven now, and all is right with the world. But in 2007, I was in Nashville, and I was asked to look at some data from the lottery, and questions: what went wrong? Was there cheating? Was there fraud? What should we do? Give us an opinion from a stat person. I met with the guys from the newspaper, and we talked about the problem and all of these things. So how did it happen? Like I said, there's a computer program that does this sort of thing, and the software that these guys were using had two functions for pulling random numbers from a set. One of the functions was for replacement, and the other one was without replacement. And the difference between these functions was essentially a single letter. Okay? And then the function has a name. So like if the function sorts something, it might be called sort. And if the function puts a capital letter at the beginning of the word, it might be called capital, something like that. So there were, for this random number draw thing, there was a name for the with replacement thing was something like RWR. So randomized with replacement, RWR. And without replacement, it was something like RNR, randomized with no replacement, something like that. I don't remember exactly what it was, and I don't know the name of the program that they were using. That is not a relevant thing. What is relevant is that these two functions were very similar, and they differed by one letter. And the programmers had simply chosen the wrong function in his or her code and had typed it in. And I don't know, maybe that person even chose the right function, but typed it in wrong. That's a possibility. Those things happen. Now, when you do this thing, when you're writing computer code, you test the output from your code, And I'm sure the person who did this decided to test the code. And when one looks at test output from this kind of code, you will, you'll set it up and you'll run it and say, give me three numbers. And it might give you like 178 and 549 and 832 or something like that. And you might look at that and you say, okay, great. Those are 3-digit numbers. They're all, each digit is between 0 and 9. And you might not notice that there are no duplicates. And it's likely that there was testing done of this software where they do this thousands of times. The computer doesn't care if it does it once or 1,000 or 1,000,000 times. It's just a computer. It has no, it doesn't sleep. You don't even need the lights on for this thing. It will just run in the dark all you want. You can set it up on Friday night before you go home and have it work all weekend, and it doesn't even need overtime. So it's likely that they did testing of thousands of these things, and they looked at thousands of these numbers. And what you would do is, if you were doing this, you would look to see what kinds of numbers you get and what kind of numbers fell in each slot. Now, if you looked at the first digit of every one of your triplets, you would see a distribution of the numbers 0 through 9 in the first digit. And if you did it right, or if you did it wrong, you would see each digit 0 through 9 show up 10% of the time for across all your hundreds of thousands, if not millions of tests. You would see right around 10% for each one of those. And the same thing for the second position, and the same thing for the third position, whether you chose it with or without replacement. Okay. And the distribution of the individual digits will look the same. You get 10%, 10%, 10%, all the way across the board along each digit. But what you won't get, if you do it the two different ways, is you won't get the same joint distribution. All right. And joint distribution are the probabilities, not of the individual components, but of the combinations that you're seeing. Okay. So for each combination that you have in the pick 3, there's 1,000 combinations starting with 000 up to 999. And you should see each combination showing up 1/1000th of the time. So if you run 100,000 observations, 100,000 testing things, you should see approximately 100 000s. You should see 100 001s, 100 002s, and so on, all the way up to, so you have 1,000 things that can happen. Each one should show up approximately 100 times. Now I say approximately because if it really is random, it's not going to always be the same, right? You're not going to get 100 of each one. You're going to get, on expectation, you're going to get 100. And there's ways to test whether or not you are within the bounds of what would happen with the probabilities that you're working with. But you should get approximately 100 for each one. And we'll go through that. If you really want to know, we'll run a special thing on how to test those samples to make sure you're within what is expected. If you do this thing where you do not allow replacement, if you do it without replacement, if you exclude the repeats, then there's only 720 different possible combinations, because there's 10 numbers that can go in the first slot, and then there's only 9 numbers that can go in the second slot because you've already thrown one out, and there's only 8 numbers that can go in the third slot. Now, there's still a lot of combinations. There's 720 of them, but you will never get, for example, 525. Because there's 2 5s. You can't get the 5 at the end because you threw it out after you got it at the beginning. You can still get a 5 at the end, but it won't have a 5 at the beginning. Right? You get a 5 at the beginning, it won't have a 5 at the end or in the middle. So there's 720 observations if you have 3, if you do the pick 3 and you do it without replacement. So if you run 100,000 tests in that situation, you should see each outcome show up 139 times or so, and for each possible outcome. And you will get zeros on the impossible outcomes. And this is where it starts to get a little tricky, because if you're not careful with the data that you get, you could just tell the computer to run it 100,000 times or 100 million times or even 1 billion times. And you're going to say, I don't want to look at all the numbers. I just want the computer to summarize them for me. And you might only see the summaries, and you might say, give me the proportions of each digit for each one of these things, and the marginals, the individual items, will come back at 10% each. But for the ones that show up, you'll only get 139 instead of 100 at each for each possible outcome. Now, so notice that when you exclude the outcomes or the repeat outcomes, instead of 1,000 observations, 1,000 possible things you could get, you're only going to get 720. If you're doing the pick 4 thing, where you have 4 digits there instead of 3, it gets even worse. You go from 10,000 possible outcomes to 5,040 possible outcomes. So just about half. Think about this. When you do 1,000, when you do the pick 4 thing, there's 10,000 possibilities, but almost half of them have a duplicate somewhere, right? So 1383, for example, has a duplicate. 4964 has a repeat. 6336 has 2 repeats in it. Okay. So, and all of those things that I just listed would be excluded if you do things without replacement. So you get the 50/40 by 10 numbers for the first one times 9 for the second one times 8 for the third one times 7 for the fourth one. You get 5,040. Now, like I said before, the individual cells will have digits that have equal probabilities, but the list of observed outcomes will not have 10,000 items. It will only have 5,040 of them, because almost half of your possible outcomes will have duplicates and therefore will be excluded. So what the important thing to note here is, even if you were a betting person and you knew that the duplicates were not possible, you still can't beat the house, at least in this case. Okay, the error was to the benefit of the lottery, not the players. Payout, like I said, was 50% of the receipts. So it would cost you $720 in the pick 3 game to guarantee winning $500. And it would cost you $5,040 in the pick 4 game to win $5,000. So you lose in the pick 4 game still, but just more slowly than you do when all the things are possible. So if this was a fraud thing, it was I don't know what you call it. I call it dumb fraud, because you still can't beat the house. So how does something like this happen, and what should you do to prevent this? This was, by all accounts, everything we had. I went to the lottery office and I met with the people who set up the systems and write the code and monitor the computers and keep everything safe and secure and on the up and up. And in order to rig this, it would be it would make Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible look like an amateur. This would be a really tricky thing to. There are lots of people that are independent of each other, doing independent things like picking the seeds for the randomization stuff, and doing sample ring runs to make sure that the computer actually works that day, and that kind of thing. So this was simple human error, and I'm convinced it was I'm just going to call it a bad validation scheme. It was not sufficient as a validation scheme. Like I said, it wasn't. It was not fraud. I said in the when I met with the newspaper, I said I am. It's a quote stolen from somebody, but a lot of people have used it. I'm less likely to attribute to malice what can adequately be described via incompetence, and I said that a lot harsher than I really meant that to be. That's how it's said these days. I think I would say I don't want to attribute to malice what can adequately be described by just screwing up. And people screw up. People make mistakes. People type in the wrong name of the function. People pick the wrong function. People come up with a scheme that looks like it validates it, but it really doesn't. People make mistakes, and someone should have caught the mistake. But there are bigger things that people don't catch. We've launched rockets to Mars and had different. We've had them crash because somebody used English units, somebody used metric units. People have made lots of mistakes, and things become catastrophic when a lot of things align the wrong way, and that happens. That's how those things can happen. They go the wrong way, and people make mistakes. And the question is, how do you figure out how to avoid that stuff? So, I think a whole bunch of people probably didn't know enough to ensure that it was going to be right. And this is where it gets a little tricky, because writing computer code is a what's the right word to say it? I don't want to say it's complicated, because it could be real simple, but there's a complicated component to it. if you know that human beings are going to be working with it on the other end. Writing computer code, they used to ask us when I was working in pharma, why does it take so long to get the analysis done of the data from the clinical trial? And I said, the writing of the code is quite quick, and the writing of the correct code is actually quite quick. What is difficult to do, what takes a long time, is convincing yourself that you actually have the correct code. So these guys who were working with pick 3, pulling out the right numbers with the right distribution, how do you ensure that it's doing the right thing? Because if you do something rational, it may look good, but it may be incomplete. So like I said before, if you look at the first digit and look at the second digit and look at the third digit and look at the distribution of the 0s through 9s in each digit, if it's working, those will be at 10% each. But there's also ways for it to work and have that, or for it to not work and have those be at 10% each. And that's the difference in with and without replacement. So I think what they did was something that was insufficient. Okay. They did not do enough work to convince themselves that they were right. Or maybe they convinced themselves they were right because they did not have enough experience. Okay. So in order to get things tested right, you have to know how it can go wrong. And that's a hard thing to know, because if you're a young person just out of school and you've written a lot of code and the projects you have been, textbook kinds of things, or if you're even doing complicated merges and joins, you learn some things, you learn how to do them right. But here, somebody didn't get something right. I think the issue is they did not have enough what I would call experience. And the reason this is so near and dear to my heart is when I was in graduate school, I made essentially the same mistake that these guys did. They used the wrong random number generator code thing, and they didn't recognize that they used the wrong one. And I did a thing like that in graduate school. I wasn't picking random numbers. I was computing Cholesky decompositions of matrices, and I wasn't detailed enough in my understanding of what these functions did to get it right. And it cost me somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 months of my graduate school career was dedicated to finding this thing that obviously was producing wrong errors, but I had no idea why. And it took me quite a while to get that done. And the first trick is to look at the code and then be certain it is doing what you think it is doing. You have to have experience to do that. You won't know that. And I've talked to my daughter in the past. She said, when I was little, this is her quoting, she said, when I was little, I used to think that my parents could see the future, because I would say something like, don't put your glass near the edge of the table. You will hit it with your elbow and it will make a mess. And she would look at me like, how can you know that? And she would leave it there. And then, of course, what would she do? She'd hit it with her elbow and would make a mess. And she'd be like, how can these guys see the future? And the answer is, we have experience. We are old. We have been there. We have done that, as they say. And that's how it goes. So with age comes experience. With experience comes wisdom. And some problems are very complicated, and you need to have a lot of experience to get through to the answers there. So this is something that AI cannot do. AI does not possess imagination. It may be able to pull a database and see what is out there on the interwebs, but it's not going to be able to tell you in a particular situation if your elbow will hit the glass and spill the milk. Young whippersnapper programmers, fresh out of school, bright, brilliant, young, fresh minds full of mush, they can't do that either, because they haven't seen enough stuff. It's not their fault. They are young. You were young. I was young. We thought we knew. And of course, the only thing we didn't know is that we were wrong. We did not have enough knowledge to know that we didn't have enough knowledge. Only old people who have failed catastrophically can imagine how things can go so wrong, and thus how to prevent them. I have experience in coding and spending months searching for a very simple explanation that when I found it at the end, it was very obvious that I was doing it wrong, and I knew exactly how I was doing it wrong. And I went back to the manual and found where I had misread it and where I had gone astray. And now it's one of those things that I look at. It's always the first thing I look at. Look at the code, look at the joint distribution, figure out whether or not the thing is doing what you want it to do. Mistakes can be painful. Old people have made the mistakes. So talk to the old people, keep them on your staff. It may be painful because they can be grumpy. It may be expensive because they are old and they like to get more money. But you have to keep people around with experience, lest you end up repeating the mistakes they have already made. Be wary of experts. Certainly, if they are strictly academic or if they are under the age of 50, real life experience is the key to understanding how to avoid mistakes. Right. And we live in a very complex world. It's people have done a lot of things that are difficult to understand. The power grid keeps running. People keep these cars going. I look at how my table saw works and how my other tools work. And I tell you, if I have questions, I don't go to the young guys. I want to see the old guys who have been around and done it. And not just the old guys who maybe in theory have done it. I want the guys who have really, really done it. And you all know people like this. So I'm just encouraging you to keep the real experience close at hand and be wary of the experts that come into town. The fancy suit may look nice, but I'll take the guy with the chapped hands, the gruff voice, the overalls, who has been there and done that. In the end, the Tennessee Lottery corrected the code, or actually the vendor for the Tennessee Lottery corrected the code. The lottery paid back players who had receipts that they had picked duplicate numbers during the bad time. They were paid back 2-1, which is a pretty good return on investment for them, considering the other options. For example, if you bought a ticket that they found out in retrospect could not have won, they were refunded their money and double, which was, what else are you going to do to those guys? You're trying to build respect there for this game being fair. People called for heads to roll. People said, CEO should be fired. These guys should be fired. But in the end, nothing, as far as I can tell, nothing really happened. The lottery sued the software company for damages, I guess, probably to their reputation. And on behalf of the people who played it, they settled 4 years later for a paltry $900,000, which it's hard for me to know how much money that is. The software company, there's it's $900,000 out of the pockets of the software company, probably caused by a programmer and probably some guy sitting in the basement working hard on his code and makes a mistake. The real question is, how do you avoid that? And the oversight has got to come from people with massive amounts of experience and really, really good testing. So those two things together are the way to go. $900,000 just in the context of that game, they sold somewhere in the neighborhood of 6 million tickets a month for the Pick 3 game during that time frame. So that was less than 1/6. It was about 1/6 of the money that they would take in during a given month. So I don't know how much the lawyers got, how much the Tennessee Lottery got, how much went to scholarships. They typically pay out hundreds of millions of dollars in scholarships to Tennessee students. The interesting thing for me is it goes for higher education, and supposedly at higher education, you're supposed to learn important things. I guess if they got really good higher education from the lottery, they would realize that the only winning move is not to play. The lottery recently got one of those big Mega Millions games or Powerball, whatever, it got to almost $2 billion recently. And I saw that ticket and I didn't really do the math on that. My wife said, let's play a game. I said, okay, great. And we talked about what would you do with $2 billion? And needless to say, we didn't win. But it's a fun thing to think about. We have done an episode, I think, where we've talked about what would you do if you had unimaginable wealth. I'm not sure it would change a whole lot of things for me or for my family or the people I know. I know some people would change their lives. I think it would probably change my life in certain senses. There was some stuff that I do now that I wouldn't think twice about. There's stuff I don't do now that I wouldn't in the future pay for without a second thought. I think I would try to be an even better tipper. I would try to help people who really needed help. But even $2 billion doesn't go very far when you start looking at really big projects. That's the buff this week. All right. Be careful of the experts, get some experience, trust the old guys. And you probably won't win the lottery, but that's okay, because you got a life on this planet, and that is a very, very good thing. Remember, seek the good, live virtuously, and flourish, and enjoy the adventure of life.
It's going to be a great day.